You do not need someone else to tell you what God is or isn't. You do not need someone else's opinion about what God is. And this is a big problem that we have with religion. It's not that religion is bad. It's that there's people who have been convinced that they don't know what God is and that somebody else does, and that they're getting God from this other person. I'm having an argument with a guy right now who's a Christian guy, and he keeps, telling me that Paul said this and Paul said that and Paul said this and Paul said that. And I'm thinking, what? Who cares what Paul said? I mean, some of the things Paul said were okay, but what difference does it make what Paul said? When somebody writes something down that's valuable, it's only valuable if it's true to you. Otherwise, it's of no value. In other words, Paul, and there's this whole mythology around Paul that some of these people believe in, that Paul was anointed by Jesus and this and that. This is Paul's story, okay? If you think that Paul knows more about God than you do, then you have a false God. It's actually quite sad, and this is what's wrong with religion. What's right? Religion isn't bad because people get together and go do a ritual together or worship God together. That's not what's wrong with it. What's wrong with it is when they think they don't know what God is, but somebody else does and can tell them what God is. To some degree, someone can remind you of what God is. Like, I can tell you something to remind you about what God is, and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. But for me to sit here and go, God gave me this information, it all comes from me, and then I get to dole it out to you, and I'm the intermediary between you and God now, that's BS. That's not true. That person is a con artist. Anyone who does that is a con artist. Anyone who tells them that God is talking to them to talk to you is a liar. Now, there's you have Aaron and Moses, and they're going to the Pharaoh, and they're telling him all these things on behalf of God. That's a story. That's a story, and it's really a story. It's a story. It's mythology. That's not the real God. If you think that you get God from a book, or God from Paul, or God from Muhammad, or God from any other person, then you're deluding yourself, and you are totally disconnected from God. You should know what God is, because it's something from within. That's why I'm telling you. If I say something to you that you realize is true for yourself, and then it reminds you, oh, that's right, that's what God is. Well, then I've helped you to remind you of it. You didn't get God from me. Okay? Anyway, I just want to give you an example of what this guy says. And I'm sure you've run into it. First of all, he goes on about how good deeds won't get you into heaven. Right? Good deeds won't get you into heaven. And I replied to him that good deeds means that you were a follower of God. In other words, if you're doing good deeds, that means you are innately a follower of God. God, the creator of the universe. God, the God of justice. God, the God of righteousness. Because you're doing the actions of the will of God, which is good, right? And if you're doing evil, if you're out doing evil, if you're whoremongering, if you're harming children, if you're selling dangerous drugs to your community, if you're robbing, if you're murdering, if you're starting wars, if you work for, a major news agency in New York, then you are following Satan. It's a metaphor. You're a disciple of Satan. Right? It's a metaphor. If you're doing good, you're a disciple of God. God taught you to do good. You see, and that's why you're doing good. And that's the evidence that you are a follower of God. And that's the evidence that you're a follower of Satan, because you're doing evil things. So your actions are the indicator. Your actions are the proof of whether or not you know God or not. Now, this doesn't come from a book. A book can help you, remind you of what you're supposed to be doing. And you go, oh yeah, that's right. So another person reminds you, hey buddy, You're supposed to be doing good. You're not supposed to be doing evil. And you're like, oh yeah, that's right. You're correct. I was looking for some answers and you reminded me. I think it has more to do with reminding than it does have to do with teaching. I'm the great teacher. I'm going to tell you, no. I could remind you. You're like, oh yeah, that's correct. So, now, so if you're doing good, you by your own, it's like it's by that action is the proof that you were a follower of God. You don't have to read the Bible. You don't have to read the Quran. You don't have to read Hinduism. You don't have to read anything. If you just, in your heart, you have the goodwill. That's the will of God. It's goodwill, God's will. If you have evil will, that's the will of the devil. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. Okay? So he goes on to say, no, because I said good deeds means by definition you're a follower of God. No, that doesn't justify you according to the Bible, Ephesians 2:8-9, by the works of righteousness, you're not saved. So that's Paul. Paul says something else. So Paul says something different than I say. Okay? So here I'm saying this and Paul's saying that. But Paul got his information directly from Jesus. No. According to Paul, anybody could make up a story like that and say that I'm the new prophet, I'm the new curator of the information, I'm the guy that you have to go to get the truth. No, that's not the real God. That's a false God. That's a false God. Now, why would someone think that way? They would think that way because I ask him, I go, why do you need someone else to tell you what God thinks? And he says, because the inspired scripture shows truth from error. I could be thinking about God and drift in my thought. That could be wrong. The scripture guides us all into the truth of the God. And by scripture, he means Paul. So he's admitting that he could be wrong, but Paul knows everything. So he does, so he can't trust his own reason. He can't trust his own mind. He can't trust his own intellect. But he can trust Paul, because Paul said that he got his information directly from Jesus. This is a fake God. This is not the real God. If that's what you think God is, you have a false God. Okay. What is God? What is God? God is the creator of the universe, right? I'm not going to go into this whole thing. You can watch my other videos because I remind you how the universe is created. In some of my other videos, I'm just reminding you of what you already basically know because you're the one doing what I'm describing in those other videos. It's not me. I'm telling you something that you should already actually know and maybe forgot. But if it rings true, then you're like, oh yeah, I guess, you can recognize that, you can demonstrate it. But, for you to say that, but what I'm saying here, why do people believe Paul? Why do people believe Paul's version of God? Why do people believe Muhammad's version of God? Because they don't trust their own intellect. But see, that's the lazy point. And this is what I was thinking about earlier today. If you don't have the practice of doing the right thing, but you're going to be controlled by external forces that don't really exist, but some external force in the universe, a book, another person, right? You're gonna hand over your center of control to something else to control you. That's not good. We don't need people like that. We don't need people like that. We need people that practice doing what they innately know is right through their conscience. The conscience is the gateway to God. The word Babylon means gateway to God, and they built the Tower of Babel, and it was a tower that went up into the heavens, and it was up in there with God because God is up in the heavens, right, in the stars, in astrotheology. Well, that's the astrotheology, the pagan gateway to God. The real gateway to God is through your conscience. Conscience. Now, that's not conscious. You have conscious like awareness. Conscience is the word con, and science, which means to know. So con means with, science? No. So when you're saying conscience, you're saying to know with, to know with, to know with. That's how you know. That's how you know right and wrong. You have a conscience. And if you do wrong, your conscience is going to let you know. It's going to just keep beating you over the head with that memory of how you messed up. So you'll remember. You'll know when you're wrong, and you'll know when you're right. That's how you know, because you have a conscience. You have a conscience. That's your gateway to the Creator. That's your gateway to the eternal. You don't need some other guy to tell you. You don't need a book to tell you. You don't need me to tell you, because you have a conscience. And if you don't have a conscience, that means you've totally shut it off. It's still there. You're just completely ignoring it. You're a psychopath. So, anyway, basically the reason why he says, because he says, I could drift in my thoughts and I could be wrong. But the scripture, meaning Paul, or any other scripture, it could be any Paul, it could be Muhammad, it could be the Quran, it could be, any other religion. Well, they're guiding me. At some point, you have to take the reins and guide yourself. Otherwise, you'll never be. See, either you come to the conclusion, you're like, oh, I get it. I get what God is, what God's will is, which is life and goodness and doing righteousness. Like, either you get it or you don't. And if you get it, you don't need anyone else to tell you when you're doing right and when you're doing wrong. In fact, Proverbs is trying to teach you, how to get on the right path. But then once you're on it, you're supposed to just walk yourself. You're not supposed to have Paul come down and write to you and tell you what to do and tell you what's right and wrong. And frankly, some of this stuff is pretty good. I'll admit it. I think some of the things Paul said were good. But, he's not God. He's not the true God. Is something within you. It's part of your nature. It's part of your innate makeup. So I guess this makes me a Gnostic. But even that word is tainted. Because Gnostic, you go on like Facebook and it's like, oh, I'm going to look up Gnosticism. We're on YouTube and it's like the symbols and the sex and this and the occult and and it has nothing to do with Gnosticism. In fact, I was kicked out of a Gnostic group because I kept telling them that all this was nonsense, had nothing to do with Gnosticism. That's what they think Gnosticism is. They always think things are something that they're not. They think Gnosticism is sex symbols, and it's all about sex and symbols and occult and this and the magic and that. No, it's not. It's about when you read the story of Noah, and it says that he walked with God, and he was a righteous man that walked with God. That means he did righteousness because he followed his conscience, which is where he was getting his information, was from God directly through his conscience. And so there's really this thing of, there's really no separation between your soul and God, ultimately. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. But you're like, well, how can people become so evil and degraded then? Because they've cut themselves off from the truth that lives in them. They've cut themselves off from it, and they've gone toward. They've lost their bearings. They've lost their. They don't know where they are. In other words, they're like, the universe is the thing now. It's like materialism. The universe is real, and they're nothing. That's kind of where they're at. It's like the universe is everything, and they're just nothing. And so the God is out there, and the universe is out there, and whether you're a materialist or a theist, it's all outside of yourself, and you're just, that's not how it is. The truth is, it's all where you are. You are from the Creator. You are from the God dimension. You are from the eternal dimension. The universe is a 3D image. And I've talked about that in my other videos. I don't want to go through a whole other lecture about that. The universe is a 3D image, and you're from the God dimension. So you have all the knowledge of God. You don't need Paul. You don't need Muhammad. You don't need anyone to tell you what God is. And anyone who claims that they know more than you about God, they might be able to remind you, But you have all that information innately if you search yourself for it. And basically, it boils down to what I've just described in this video. I don't want to go over it all again and again and again. Hopefully, you get the picture. Hopefully, you get the picture. Anything outside yourself is part of the illusion. Let's put it that way. And it's not that the illusions aren't real; they are real. Because the only thing that's real are the things that you know. If you're from the God dimension, which you are, the only thing that's real are your thoughts and other people's thoughts, and everyone's thoughts collectively. That's reality. There is no other reality, so it's very real. But when people don't know they forget. Let's say they forget who they are, where they come from. Now that the reality, the projection, that's what's everything, right? The thing that it's all out there. The infinite space. Oh, God is out in space somewhere. And this guy over here named Paul, he's contacted the space god, and he can tell me how I'm supposed to behave and what I'm supposed to do because I don't know. See how inverted that is? That's what I'm talking about. So I'll end the video on that point because I think that sums it up.